Mr. Victor, can you confirm if your slide is good?
It's in good shape. It's in good shape.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's good. Okay. So we are welcome to this edition of Settlement Hour. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, you can all hear me? Please, can you confirm if you can hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Oh, great. So
we can hear you.
Good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you are connecting with us from. We are happy and delightful to welcome you to this edition of the Settlement Hour. The Settlement Hour is the professional development program for the Settlement House ADR Training Institute. And this is a recurring program. The aim of the program is to see how we can equip ADR practitioners both in Nigeria and outside Nigeria, and those who are interested in developing a career in ADR on the prospects of ADR, and then some specialized areas where practitioners may want to dive into or may seek more understanding. Now, we know that beyond the training, the foundational mediation skill training or ADR training that a practitioner will get, there is need for him to actually engage in continuous professional development. And we deem it fit under the Settlement Hour to bring in speakers, profound experts like the ones we have here. Mr. Victor is here and Mr. Joseph is here. You're welcome, sir. You know, people like this to speak into some topics that are relevant to the ADR world. Before we proceed, I would like to just review a little of our expectation before we go dive into the program for the day. So I will just be calling randomly. I know, let me hear from Mr. Arup Ratan. What do you think is your expectation for today?
Actually, here in India, located in is not stable right now. Let me some time to adjust with the net, and thereafter I am coming back in your meeting. Okay, please give me some time. Thanks. Actually, I cannot hear you also properly.
Okay, can you hear me?
This is not the problem from your end. It is the problem in India. In Delhi, particularly right now, I am facing.
Okay. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is okay now. So, Mr. Engineer said, right. I don't know. Can you tell us your expectation for today? What do you think reconciliation is, and what are you expecting from the section today?
All these talks along the level, just like this level, this is the exit level.
Yes, Mr. said with us.
And then we
Okay. Mr. Seth, okay. Let's come back to Mr. Stephen. Once again, please, can you share your expectation with us today?
Yes, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Yes. My expectation really is to have a very, very nice understanding on how reconciliation impacts on mediation. Because there may be times when parties can settle and still leave some, for lack of better terms, some dry spells in their souls in the manner in which the process has taken place. So my expectation is to try and see how reconciliation sort of brings to an end any little nigglings that would lie after parties have sort of settled. I think for me, in a nutshell, that is what I would want to look out. And then any other that I might have to learn from the eminent people that will be doing the presentation. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I don't know. Did you hear what I said?
Yes, we heard you. We heard you. Thank you very much. Yes. We just want to hear lastly from Usulo. Just briefly your expectation for today as we proceed into the program for the day. Mr. Usulo, are you with us? Okay, so thank you very much for the review of the expectations. You are all welcome once again to the third edition of Settlement Hour, the series on acceptance, apology, and forgiveness. Today we are going to be looking at reconciliation, which is one of the very, very vital, crucial aspect of the mediation. So today we have our very own Victor Baba, who is going to be leading this conversation. And we also have Mr. Joseph George, a practicing mediator from Florida, USA. You are all welcome. So briefly, we are going to be looking at the profile of our speaker for those who do not have not met him. And Mr. Victor Baba Emmanuel Aligo is an ordained minister and a marketplace emissary to his generation. He is an alternative dispute resolution and dispute system design consultant and a mediation trainer. He is a JAM Western 2020 fellow and an intern with distinguished mediators and arbitrators. Can you confirm if you can hear me, please?
I can hear you.
Great, great. Yes. He is a JAM Western fellow and he is an intern with distinguished mediators and arbitrators at the JAM's offices at California, United States. Mr. Victor Baba has practiced community mediation, family mediation, and intercultural mediation for 6 years with different entities including boutique firms and Federation of Women Lawyers, FIDA Kenya branch. He is an advisor to the rector and visiting lecturer at the Global University of Somalia, and he is an empaneled faculty for mediation hubs in Nigeria, Lagos, Kaduna, respectively. He is a mediation expert at ACOT International, an ADR organization which is based in India, where he trains and mentors mediators all over the world. At present, he is an instructor and a research fellow at the Institute of Public Policy and International Affairs housed at the United States International University. Please join me welcome Mr. Victor Baba, who is going to be our lead speaker for today. Yeah. Without lest I forget, Mr. Victor is also a trainer with the Settlement House ADR Training Institute. He is a member of our faculty. He is a faculty member of the SHATI, Settlement House ADR Training Institute, and he's also he also mediates with us as a neutral panel member. Our second but not the least speaker for today is Mr. Joseph George.
Hello, please can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting you. We can hear you quite clear, but there's so much noise on your background. There are some people discussing there and it's interfering, please.
Okay.
Thanks.
Now, Mr. Joseph George is an intelligent and astute businessman with an innovative and motivational mindset. He has passion for helping people, and you can see that shows in his coming up for this program to speak, to see how we can develop and add to the ADR world. As an, he is not only a mediator or an arbitrator, he's a negotiator as well as an arbitrator. He practices ADR in his full, capacity. As an arbitrator, his role is to ensure that parties get a fair and effectively managed proceeding, and he has talent. His talent as a mediator helps to guide the parties to mutually satisfactory dispute settlement. Mr. George Joseph has a lot of profile. He is a Supreme Court of Florida certified mediator, and that is the highest you can get in the United States of America. And we are happy that he is joining us today in this conversation, just for you to know that you are going to be gaining a lot. You are going to be gaining a lot. Now, he is a Florida Supreme Court certified county mediator. He is also a Florida Supreme Court certified arbitrator. He is EEO investor, that's Equal Employment Opportunity Certified Worker Compensation Professional. He is a certified immigration form specialist. He is a licensed notary and e-notary. He is a certified loan signing agent. He is a certified cannabis mediator. He is a certified ADA coordinator, subject matter expert. He is a certified human resource professional. He is a certified recruiting professional. He is a construction mediator and arbitrator. I need to comment here because, the construction industry, is more into construction arbitration. But you know, mediation in construction is also there. And we are hoping that with time, we are going to get to talk about mediation in the construction industry, so that it will not just be arbitration, but mediation as well. I'm happy to announce that Mr. Joseph George is an expert in construction mediation. And I hope that we are going to gain a lot from him today. And finally, he's LTHOA, COA mediator and arbitrator. He's a labor and employment mediator. And I don't know if you have had anything like this, a hostage negotiator. I don't know if you have heard, you know, that's a very interesting aspect of it. We are going to learn more about that when the time comes. So please join me, welcome Mr. Joseph George and Mr. Victor Baba to this wonderful occasion for today. So without waste of time, we will go straight to the business of the day. Please, if you have questions, you can write them down in the chat box or take note of them. We are going to attend to them. And Mr. Victor, over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. I am absolutely joining you from Nairobi, Kenya, and the sun is all over the place, and that looks good. With that said and done, I'd just like us to get down to business, as my good brother, Mr. Nanchang, has alluded to. And I must say he's a recovering lawyer as well. And today we are lucky and privileged to have a recovering senior advocate from Zambia in the person of senior counsel Stephen Lungu, an amazing personality, an eminent scholar. His work just speaks volume. That goes to tell you that we are in the right pair of hands today. With that said, again, I'd just like to maybe first and foremost extend my gratitude to Settlement House ADR Training Institute, and by extension to Accords International. Today we don't have the person of Upasana Singh here, but I'm sure we'll get to benefit from a senior counsel, Stephen Lungu as well. And I'm glad that we have Joseph here as my colleague. And with that said and done, let's get down to business. I hope I am clear. My audio is good and my video is good. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see me and if you can hear me perfectly.
Yes, yeah, you can. And please, before you proceed, I can see the chairman of the Settlement House ADR Training Institute, that's the governing body. Please, Ma, you are welcome. Maybe you can say one or two things and give us go ahead to proceed for the day.
Sure. Sure.
Hello, ma'am.
Compliments to everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. It's not proper for me to interrupt our guest speaker, so I will just say welcome everybody on board. Please, Mr. Baba, you can continue.
Thank you so much, Mine. It's always good to have you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And greetings to every one of you. Thank you so much for carving time out of your precious schedule. I know today is Monday, and Monday is pretty important to so many people. Myself, Mondays is when I get to set the tone for the week. So I'm really glad that you could all spare a few minutes and hours just to be here. That really means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to Settlement House ADR Training Institute. So that said and done, we can now get down to a business. So today we'll get to look at reconciliation. And I must say that today our discussions come full circle. In our previous discussions, we've looked into the subject matter of an apology. We went into the dynamics and the nitty-gritties of an apology. We looked at the different kinds of apologies, and we looked at how an advocate, a lawyer, a peacemaker can encourage or can facilitate an apology extended from the victim to the perpetrator. And then we went on and looked into the concept of what a forgiveness is, what it's all about, who gets to extend a forgiveness, and so on and so to speak. And I remember from our previous conversation, somebody raised the question, what happens where one party has extended an apology and the other party doesn't seem to want to reciprocate an apology with a forgiveness? And we looked at quite a number of scenarios. And one of the scenarios that we explicitly looked into was the fact that these are processes. These are not events. Most of these concepts are processes as opposed to events. And at times, parties, depending on their personalities, depending on depending on the complexity or nature of the harm, might require time just to respond to that. All I'm trying to say is that when you extend an apology and the other party doesn't seem in a position to reciprocate that with an act of forgiveness, all I'm trying to tell you is that they need time to process that, and within time they will respond to you. So our agenda today is to look into a reconciliation. And as I just pointed out in the previously, we looked into an apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And allow me to submit this to you, that our discussions today is coming in full circle. And one thing I want you to have at the back of your mind is that an apology would often be the stepping stone for forgiveness. And where you have an apology and forgiveness meeting, that's where you have reconciliation. So to put it different, apologies and forgiveness, an apology and a forgiveness are the building blocks of what reconciliation is. And before I get down to the definition of what reconciliation is, what it's all about, allow me just to share maybe a story with you people, just to demonstrate and illustrate to you that this is not theory, that this is practical. Last year, I had a mediation that involved a mother and a biological daughter, and it had family issues involved. We had commercial disputes, all wrapped up together. So to cut a long story short, in 2011, we had a mother who sued her daughter, and she sued her daughter because of the fact that she thought the daughter was mismanaging their family business. This is a family that had worked hard, determined, and built a whole enterprise, a whole business enterprise. And this was an enterprise that was being run and owned by a family. And the matriarch of the family was, she was the top leader. She was the manager of the business. And through time, she brought in her family members. And by family members, I mean, she brought in her husband and she brought in the daughters. And one of the daughters, the eldest daughter, got into the business at pretty an early age. At the age of 18, she quit schooling and decided to give her time and her resource and commitment to the family business. And over time, the business grew into a business empire. And so in 2021, wrangles emerged and the mother decided to sue her daughter. I hope you get the intensity of this. A mom suing her own biological daughter. And the case dragged on for about 6 years. And in 2026, the daughter sued the mom as well. And so in 2022, the matter was brought to my desk for mediation. And this was referred by the court. And so we sat with the parties, and the parties were extremely at loggerheads. You know, emotions were all over the place, to the point that we couldn't have a joint session. So what I did was break the session into breakouts. So we went into breakouts. And so you can probably tell that once you go into breakout rooms, what you need to do is shuttle diplomacy. By shuttle diplomacy or shuttle mediation, what I mean is that you go into the other room, you talk to them, you hear what they're trying to say, and you come to the other room and tell the parties, and the same drill goes on. They will react to the information and they will send you back to the other room. So it's a back and forth, and that's why we call it a shuttle mediation. You get to go in between the rooms, just listening to what the parties are saying. And one of the things that came to the surface based on that was the fact that there were a lot of emotions in the room. Remember, this is a matter that had been going on for almost a decade. And what the court processes did was it further extended the frontiers of the dispute. And what I remember from the case is, at the end of the day, we started at a pretty difficult a moment. The lawyers in the room were making things extremely difficult. And so you had two layers of conflict here. You had two lawyers who couldn't agree, number one, to speak. And then number two, you had parties who were not willing to see eye to eye. But guess what? As the process went on, at some point, using questions and reframing of issues, I saw one of the parties, particularly the daughter, extend an act of apology to her mom. And what she said, I remember what she said, that this is beyond money for her. And at times you have cases where it's not just about the numbers. I know numbers matter. Numbers are extremely important. Money is important in life, just to say the least. But at times, as a mediator, you come across situations where money is not the real problem in the room. The real problem in the room has got to do with emotions that have pent up for years, and so on and so to speak. And so this is one case scenario where I saw a daughter extend an apology to the mom, and the mom reciprocated that apology with a forgiveness. And at that point in time, we had reconciliation take place. So this goes to reinforce the idea that apology and an act of forgiveness leads you to reconciliation. Reconciliation is when the whole process comes into full circle. And today we'll get to look at devices or mechanisms on how you as a mediator can use to deploy to make sure that the parties reconcile. And I'm going to emphasize this again. I'm going to underscore this again, that at times money is not the problem, however much money is important. There are situations where if you look critically into the problem, remember, as mediators, we are problem solvers. One of the things that will come across to you is that these parties are here not looking for money, but their problem is beyond the frontiers of money. And that is what our discussions will enable you to get to see and get to do as well, because this is doable. And that's why I spoke about that one case scenario where I had a family dispute that had elements of commercial dispute as well, wrangles, so to speak. So this is doable, and it makes a change. It makes a big change, so to speak. With that said and done, maybe we can get to look at what reconciliation is all about. And one thing I want you to take note of is the fact that reconciliation comes after forgiveness. And in our previous discussion, we looked at what forgiveness is all about. And I think at some point we implicitly referred to the fact that there are times where you have a unilateral act of forgiveness. And remember here, it's the victim who is extending an act of forgiveness. It's the victim here who is saying to their perpetrator, it might not be face to face, but this is what they're telling them, that I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. I'm willing. Oh, sorry about that. As I was saying, the language of reconciliation is a language of moving forward. We've had this case for the last 10 years. We've spent resources on this. we've spent time. It's draining us emotionally. It's draining us psychologically and physically. Why don't we move forward? And so in that sense, reconciliation becomes a sort of an antidote to people getting stuck up in the past. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, so what reconciliation does is that it gives people the opportunity to move forward, so to speak. And so, which brings me to the fact that apology and apology that is reciprocated with forgiveness forms what you call reconciliation. So reconciliation, in a nutshell, is a marriage between an apology and forgiveness as well. So when you have these two blocks together, what you have through reconciliation as peace. At times in our courtrooms, or even in arbitration by extension, you don't get to have people reconciling, people letting their past to be their past and forging a path forward. So this is one of the magical things about mediation, that you have an opportunity to move forward. You have an opportunity to develop your relationship further. And this is why I think at times it's important that we get to have the proper definition of what mediation is. Because there are people who will tell you that mediation is not just a dispute solving process. There are people who will tell you that every time they have a dispute, they see it as an opportunity to grow from that. And that's what apologies, forgiveness, and reconciliation does. It affords the parties an opportunity to develop their personalities, for instance. It's only in mediation where personalities get to develop their personalities, because we are inherently flawed. And through the process of mediation, once you come across a mediator who knows how to trigger an apology and knows how to encourage forgiveness and reconciliation, what you have is a perfect opportunity for the parties to develop their personalities. So this is a dynamic attribute that you only get to see in mediation. And with that in mind, maybe allow me to ask a few questions, about reconciliation. And one of the questions that I want us to wrap our heads around is a question around: is reconciliation an internal process, or is it an external process? And there is a wide view that a reconciliation cannot happen until and unless you have reconciled yourself. I mean, when you look at a party extending an apology, this is somebody who has sat down and had an introspection of the fact that they occasioned an act that led to a wrongdoing to somebody. And so this is a question that I want us maybe at some point before we get to our private chambers and rest, we need to ask ourselves this question: is reconciliation an internal process, first and foremost? And then secondly, is it an external process? And I humbly submit to you that, number one, it's an internal process. It's a process that goes on within our minds and our hearts before we can come out and say that we have reconciled, or I have forgiven you. Before somebody can say that, I am so sorry. There's lots of internal synergies that are involved in that process. And then number two, and this is again an important question: is reconciliation an event or a process? And I want to submit to you that there are scenarios where one party can let the other party know that I am so sorry that I stepped on your toe, and the party will reciprocate that with an act of forgiveness, and there you have reconciliation. But I want us to understand that this process, it's a process as opposed to an event. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, because of the fact that we have a lot of emotions that are involved behind these processes. So I just thought that maybe it was important for me to ask this question and maybe provide a feedback as well. And that brings us to our third question. Do you think reconciliation is synonymous with peace? And I want to look at it from a post-conflict society. And by a post-conflict society here, I want us to take a mental flight to countries like South Africa that went through the painful ordeal of apartheid, a system that was obnoxious, a system that upgraded one a race at the expense of another race. And then again, I want us to look at Liberia. I think we are all aware of the genocide that took place in Liberia and in Rwanda. And we get to see how reconciliation played an imminent role in terms of transitioning these societies from conflict societies to post-conflict societies. Again, that speaks to the significance of reconciliation. So I want to see reconciliation is many things to people. I don't think reconciliation is a springboard that leads to a sustainable peace in the long run. But that's just my thinking. I don't know what you guys think. Maybe at some point we'll get to look at some of these concepts. You know, what's peace? Is reconciliation an internal process, an external process? Is it an event or a process? Because I would want to listen to what you guys have to say about this, because I think we all have opinions over some of these concepts, so to speak. And with that, maybe I'd like us to venture into the waters of or number three, if you are a mediator, why should you mediate? Make your parties the dispute, so to speak, war. You know, oh, I'm so sorry about that. From where I see it, one of the fundamental reasons why I think we need to encourage parties, or you could be here a father, you could be a mother, and your children are ever caught up in disputes. Why I think we need to encourage parties to get into reconciliation is the fact that relationships are very important. I have this to say about relationships, that growth is a product of relationships and a sense of community. And so where you have two siblings at loggerheads, I think it's important that you stress to them that such a relationship is a relationship that they just have to coexist. There are certain relationships in life that are mandatory. We just need to coexist. Look at relationships such as two couples. And at times when you have divorce, these parties need to understand the fact that their relationship is fundamental, because you have children that are involved in this. And one of the fundamental principles in the principle of best interest of the child. So when you have two parties that have divorced and they have issues around custody of their children, you need to impress. And here we are talking about, the end of the day, you need to come to terms with the fact that you have children who have their own interests, so to speak. And so how do you bring in the interests of the children? You need to impress to the parties that, yes, you are divorced, but you need to have a relationship, a parenting relationship over your children, and so on and so to speak. Where you have brothers and sisters, again, you need to stress to them the importance of having a relationship that has to coexist. Families, and their father was a prominent figure in Kenya, and over the years he had accumulated a huge chunk of wealth, and unfortunately when he he went to glory, he didn't have a will. And so you have 5 kids who are fighting over the property of their father. And I remember there were 4 brothers and 1 sister. And from one of the things that I gathered from the process was the fact that the 4 brothers had ganged up against their poor sister. I'm just saying this because we have this is a platform where I want us to learn a few things and so on and so to speak. And so when the parties walked into the mediation room, I remember the brothers had a lawyer and the sister didn't have a lawyer. And one of the things that before we actually got into the process was stressing to them the importance of the fact that you are siblings, so to speak. And one of the ideals that will guide how we move forward is the fact that you already have a relationship where you need to coexist. So there are certain relationships, by nature of the relationships, you have to stress to the parties that they need to coexist. And that brings me to my number 2 principle, which is what I call moral code, where you have 2 parties that subscribe to one faith, Christian and Christian, and Muslims and Muslims. I think it's a religious code that parties need to reconcile, the so-called good neighbors principle. At any given point in time, we should be in good books with our neighbors and so on and so to speak. So religion has a way of impressing or underscoring the significance of having reconciliation in our everyday grind and so on and so to speak. I am a practicing Christian, and one of the fundamental principles, so to speak, that governs how we practice our Christianity is the fact that we are one body. And I am led to understand that that's the principle in Islam, that you are one body, and a body that is in conflict with itself might not be productive at the end of the day. You might not live out your expectations, or you might not live out your corporate purpose, so to speak. That's the principle here that I'm trying to allude to as I get to my slides. Just a minute. And the number 3, the other therapeutic significance of reconciliation is the fact that it heals societies. When I look at a society like Rwanda, which I think is a tremendous case study of what reconciliation and some of these processes can do. And I am led to understand that that Rwanda is one of the most advanced societies when it comes to mediation. And maybe one day we'll get to invite a practitioner from Rwanda and have them speak to us how reconciliation has played a pivotal role in transitioning Rwanda into a fully fledged, well-functioning societies and so on and so to speak. So there are therapeutic properties that can be achieved out of a reconciliation. And I remember from our previous conversation on forgiveness, one of the significant factors that motivates people to forgive others is the fact that it's a healing process. Sorry, it's a healing process, and so it's a gift to yourself. And allow me maybe to say this, that reconciliation becomes a gift to a society, not just to one generation, but to other generations to come. So these are some of the factors that I think would encourage us to facilitate reconciliation during our trainings. I think we've looked at what a reconciliation is. We've looked at the fundamental questions, which brings me to, excuse me, which brings me to our third subject matter, which I think is equally important. And here I want us to look at how mediators can encourage a reconciliation. And there are 3 proven strategies that mediators can use to facilitate or encourage a reconciliation. I'm not just saying that there are 3, but there could be more. But for purposes of our learning today, I want us to look at 3. Number 1, we'll get to look at questions. And then number 2, we'll look into the power of reframing issues. And then number 2, we'll get to look at reframing issues. And then number 3, we'll get to look at empathy. And empathy is just one thing that I find extremely difficult to teach. It's just something that I feel is an inherent. It's something that is, I think, wired in every human being. We are wired to empathize with other people. So and so on and so to speak. So number one, we'll look at use of questions to encourage reconciliation, and then we'll look at the power of reframing issues, and then number three, we'll look into the power of empathy. Empathy is very important, and I cannot underscore that important. In communications, one of the tools that we try as much as possible to bring into the possession of mediators is a tool of question, because questions play an important role in provoking a sense of responsibility into the parties. So when you want to encourage parties to reconcile, one of the things that you need to do is deploy the use of questions. And I have a case study of questions here that you want to ask the parties. How important is a perpetrator in your life? You know, assuming you have a conflict where you have a supplier and an organization, and this is a relationship that has existed for a year, so on and so to speak. So this is a question that you can use to drive the significance of reconciliation to the parties. You know, how important is this person in your life? For instance, where you have a family dispute between a husband and a wife, you know, one of the fundamental questions that you can ask one of the parties to provoke these processes to take place is ask a question: how important is this person in your life? Or how important is this entity to your entity if you are speaking to a CEO? And then number two, another question that I think we can use to trigger, you know, some form of thinking in a party could be a question like, can you live without the presence of this person? Can you live without the presence of this entity? Right. So these are questions that we can deploy to encourage or facilitate reconciliation to take place. And then with that, maybe we can look at reframing, the power of reframing. Again, one statement that I like to often throw around is the fact that our words can reframe issues or our works can flame issues. Therefore, communication and language is equally important in mediation. And most importantly, where you have fragile disputes, and by fragile, I mean where you have lots of emotions involved. It's important that we as mediators or we as facilitators become aware of our language, because at times, subconsciously, you can speak a word that could throw the parties off balance. And so I think it's important that we get to understand that at the back of our mind. The American Psychological Association defines reframing as rethinking of a scenario or rethinking of a context. The word here is conceptualization, and conceptualization here means defining a situation, because at times, all too often, the solution is in the room, but somehow the parties at the back of their minds think that we need somebody else. That's the power of reframing issues. And we as mediators, I think we owe it not just to the parties, but to the profession to see to it that we can spur a reconceptualization of the problem, of an issue, or a context altogether, so that the parties can see it from a different lens. And as I speak about reframing, our role when it comes to reframing of issues is empowering the parties to engage into some kind of a system thinking. And I'm led to understand that system thinking is a whole universe of its own. It's a whole discipline that I think we need to check it out. And one of my assignments to us is, even as we talk about these issues, is let's get to look into systems thinking, because it plays a role in how we think as mediators. And that's why at times, in your office as a mediator, you're not just a mediator, you're a problem solver. There are issues that will have a context of a public policy. And therefore, you're called to think outside the box. I think I've been speaking all this while just to get you to understand the importance of thinking outside the box. And here, we mediators, we need to think outside the box first. If we are to inspire the parties to speak, if we are called to trigger the parties to think outside the box. So that's what reframing does. It pulls us out of the box, and in that natural act, we get to have a light bulb. You know, the light bulb switches on. And so that's what reframing is all about. It's about creating or catalyzing the processes that will lead the parties to have a light bulb moment. And so when you are trying to facilitate and encourage mediation, this is what you should engage into, reframing the issues. At times, you just need to make the parties look at things from a different vantage point, and so on and so to speak. Somebody once told me this, that your point of view determines how you view things in life. And that's very important. That's a skill that I think we need to inculcate in our everyday grind and everyday lives. The ability to look at things from a different lens altogether. And with that said and done, I'd like maybe to, today I'm very cautious of time. I'd like us maybe to jump into our third element, which is encouraging empathy. And Roman is a philosopher from Australia, and this is what he once said, that an empathy is an ideal that has power both to transform our lives and to bring about fundamental social change. It's an ideal that has the power both to transform our lives and to bring about fundamental social change. And I'd just like maybe to encourage us to look at Liberia, look at Liberia, look at South Africa to an extent, and look at Rwanda, just to stress the importance of empathy in our everyday lives and its transformative powers, and so on and so to speak. So the word empathy has its origin in Greek. The word is pathos, and pathos means to suffer with. So every time you empathize with a party, what you're doing is engaging into a process where you are suffering with that party. So that's what an empathy is all about. When you say that you empathize with somebody, what you are doing is you're saying that I resonate with you, I identify with your suffering. And in the context of a mediation, we are called to encourage parties to empathize. And like I said earlier on, it's one of those concepts that it's really difficult to teach, because this is something that has to be wired in a human being. And empathy here is a map that helps in resolving conflicts, avoiding violence, reducing cultural misunderstandings, and social and ecological injustices. And allow me to say this, if you look at the whole movement of Dr. Martin Luther King, if you look at the movement of Nelson Mandela, and I'm saying movement of because these are individuals who shaped these movements. If you look at the movement of Mahatma Gandhi in India, one of the things that comes to mind is he deployed empathy. That's why he could sit down and negotiate with the other party. And this is what makes them stand out. Their ability to deploy empathy in the face of violence or even in the face of injustice. Because at times, because of all the emotions that are in the room, we are thrown off balance and we fail to empathize with these, our oppressors, so to speak. And you look at South Africa, one of the things that makes Nelson Mandela stand out, it's not even his presidency, but it's how he treats other human beings in the face of injustices. And this is the power of empathy here, that if you can encourage a victim to recognize that the other party is suffering as well, that the perpetrator is suffering, what you have created is a magical atmosphere for reconciliation to take place. And so here, our take-home assignment or our take-home principle here is encouraging even the victim to see to it that they can empathize with the perpetrator. And we are not by any means trying to discount the fact that the victim is suffering out of the wrongdoings of the perpetrator. So it's important that we get to have this at the back of our mind and inculcate and so on and so to speak, how to encourage a party to extend an empathy. And with that said and done, maybe we can invite questions, or I open the floor back. I return the floor back to Mr. Nanchang. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Victor, for this enlightening session. It was really interesting to learn about reconciliation. Well, if you have questions, you can drop them on the chat box. We will call on Mr. Joseph to speak, then we entertain questions. So please, Mr. Joseph, you're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Oh, okay, it's morning over there in Florida. This is a hot afternoon. This is 2:33 p.m. in Nigeria.
It's 9:33 here in Florida, and the weather is about 72 degrees. So it's a beautiful weather, nice day to go to the beach and relax. It's beautiful. Let's do a little bit of shopping.
Yeah. All right,
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of reconciliation in mediation. And I always do things differently than everybody else. So I like to do a little storytelling and bring in a little bit of some of the cases I've worked on or stories I've heard through different colleagues. But mediation is a powerful tool for resolving disputes. And when parties are able to reconcile their differences, the benefits can be far-reaching. So we like to always, as mediators, go into the mediation process with our mindset on how can we resolve this dispute between both parties, but also how can we save the relationship between them also. So that way, when they leave the mediation process, they can actually not come back into mediation, but they can actually be very favorable to each other. So reconciliation and mediation means finding a way for both parties to come to an agreement that satisfies their needs and interests. This can involve acknowledging the emotional impact of the dispute, identifying common goals, generating and evaluating options, negotiating and settling, developing and plan for implementation, and maintaining an ongoing communication with the parties. So as mediators, sometimes we so focus on, and arbitrators do it too, we're so focused on sitting back sometimes, let the parties try to resolve it themselves. That's good depending on the case. Again, there's no such thing as a cookie cutter mediation. Every mediation is different just because every person is different. And then you have different personalities that's within the mediation. So the benefits of reconciliations are many. First and foremost, it allows parties to resolve their differences without resorting to litigation or other adversarial processes. So if we could get them to apologize, or we could get them to come to some type of agreement, then we kind of terminate the litigation process. And we save them a whole lot of money down the road too. Because, as you know, to go to the litigation process, it's a lengthy process, depending on the court system or country you're in. Sometimes you could litigate a case for 2-3 years. You have other attorneys that could do a deposition that takes time, fact finding, all that takes time. If it's insurance company, you're going up against insurance company, that's definitely going to take time because, sometimes these insurance companies, they hire private investigators to try to catch you in some type of wrongdoing. So that in itself takes time, Not only that, you have where attorney could file a motion to depress certain documentations, so it's not get to court, and then you could file a motion for answer appeal. You know, you have different things that these attorneys could do to make a litigation process extend more than you need to be. So that's why it's always good to help resolve the dispute in mediation. Arbitration is different because arbitration, you're more of the judge and jurist, you're listening to it. But sometimes in your closing arguments, you kind of encourage them that, you know, even though that you're going to be filing a award on one party's behalf, that they could also try themselves to resolve, to find some common ground between them where they could resolve the relationship. So preserving the relationship is important in mediation. That's the most important part, is preserving a relationship. In addition to reconciliation can lead to creating solutions that may not have been possible in more adversarial process. By working together to find a mutual acceptable solution, parties can often come up with solutions that are tailored to their specific needs and interests. So when you say specific needs and interests, what we're actually talking about, let's go to you have two family members, two brothers. We can use two brothers, and both brothers decided to open up a furniture business, and the business was going good. And now that business is going good, and one person feels like they're doing a whole lot more work than the other brother. The other brother, he's not coming to the business a whole lot. So now the partnership start to sour a little bit. They have a conversation with each other. The other one's like, man, I'm pulling my own weight. You need to keep out my business. We both 50-50, you know. Then they decide to get real bad. And then now the both parties end up into mediation. Both brothers are explaining to the mediator how, you know, the other party, the other one feels like he's not working too much, and he feels like he's working a whole lot, and they don't see eye to eye. Me personally, as a mediator, listening to that conversation between both of the brothers, I would say, first thing I always like to know in the partnerships, because business partnerships it's what you want to save the most. So you turn to them and I usually say, where's the contract? These particular brothers, because it's family, and this happens all too many, because it's family, they never even put a contract together. So when there's no contract in place, there's no accountability. And when there's no accountability, everybody just do what they want, because nobody really has a role on what to do. So both brothers feel like, I could come in when I want, I could do what I want, I'm entitled to 50%, and that's it. So what I would do is I lay out a contract for them and say, okay, what is your strength? What is your weakness? And I usually use that with both parties and say, what is your strength? What is your weakness? And then you take their strengths and you put it on one paper for both brothers, and you put the same on both sides. And then you take both of their weaknesses, and then you say, okay, now you guys can play off each other's strengths and run this business. But this is what you, Mr. Robert and Mr. Kevin, Mr. Robert, you're going to be in charge of this part of the business. Mr. Kevin, you're going to be in charge of this part of the business. So now that you don't draft that up, now you got both parties accountable. So once you got both parties accountable and you explain to them each other's role, now you could go into the process of reconciliation. Because now you could turn to them and say, listen, because you guys didn't have a contract in place, you guys didn't have a particular role. So that was the source of the problem with your partnership. There was no role playing. So it's not that your brother hates you or despises you or thinks that you're lazy. You guys never define a role for each other. So without defining a role for each other, there was no process in place. And when there's no processes in place, you have chaos in a business. So that's where the partnership fall apart. So now that we put processes and accountability and titles to each brother's name, now we could go into the reconciliation part and say, okay, now you guys can go back to being family. And you always try to echo to them that you always, at the end of the day, you got to keep business and family life completely separate. That way you don't ruin the partnership. So with doing that, the reconciliation portion of that partnership, you actually save the partnership between both parties. So now the brothers could go on being brothers. I'm sure they can make their mommy and daddy real happy that they're not arguing and fighting. And the business will flourish that way. So in conciliation, I believe that reconciliation in mediation is a powerful tool to resolve disputes in a positive and constructive way. And that's how I say in the business partnership with the two brothers, it saves it, and it's positive for both parties, and it's a constructive way to resolve the mediation and also save the partnership. So by working together to find a mutual acceptable solution, parties can often achieve results that are more satisfying than what they could achieve throughout an adversarial process. I encourage all of you to consider mediation as a way to resolve your dispute and to embrace the spirit of reconciliation as to work towards a positive outcome. So we always want to work towards that positive outcome in mediation. And I know sometimes in mediation, sometimes you have parties that's just screaming at each other, they're just going at it. But as mediators, we got to cool the temperature down in the room. And sometimes we have to yell at the party. Sometimes if they're not really listening, sometimes you have to slam your hand down on the desk and be like, hey, not in here. This is my mediation. We're gonna run it. We're gonna be professional. And sometimes you have to do that. Not all the time. You have to be that. You probably would say 1% of the time. I've had to do it. If you ever do a landlord and tenant dispute, those are always pretty intense and heated disputes because you got one person don't want to leave their home. You have the landlord who wants his place so he can resell it back to somebody else, move somebody in. And the other person feel like the landlord didn't take care of the place enough. And he should be entitled to a free rent or to stay there longer. But when you go to court and the judge say, hey, we're gonna continue with this eviction process, it gets to be tricky when you're telling somebody that you have to move them out of their home. So even in a landlord and tenant dispute, we still want to use the reconciliation process because we have to explain to the other party, this landlord might have 5, 6, 10 different properties. So you might want to be a little bit nice to this landlord because the next property you go to, he might own it. And now because he remember of the bad situation y'all had with the last eviction process, he might not want you there. But if you was nice to him and you say, hey, I ran into hard times, it was a bad time for me, and he might remember that. He said, I didn't mean to not pay you your rent. I lost my job. I went through a divorce. My wife got everything. She cleaned my clock. I had no money left. So that's the reason why this eviction is happening. But I understand your position and I'm going to pick a day where I can move out. And the landlord will be more receptive to that versus you arguing with him and, making things worse for yourself. That way, if he decided to push forward eviction or move into a different way of handling the eviction process with you, for future reference, he might remember you when you try to apply on his other properties. And he might be like, this person, they got evicted off of one of my properties, but it was only because the situation of the divorce and losing his job all at the same time. But he was very respectful in the process. And you know what? He has a new job now. He's got his life back together. He can meet the qualifications of the lease agreement. We could have him live on one of our properties again. So you always got to try to resolve everything peacefully as much as you can. And here's some tips for achieving reconciliation and mediation. Listening actively. It is important to actively listen to other parties' perspective without interrupting or becoming defensive. And sometimes when people try to explain stuff to us, we get so defensive sometimes. We're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Sometimes you got to pull back and say, you know what? I see this from your point of view. And sometimes I think it's just human nature for us to feel like we're doing our best, we're number one at something. So when somebody is giving us constructive criticism, we get so defensive and we're like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I got my BA in this, I got my master's, I got this degree in this, and we don't see things from their point of view. So sometimes we gotta just breathe, count in our head, and just listen. That whole listening process is so important, because if we're not listening and we're talking, so we're not listening. So we can't hear exactly what the other person is trying to say. So we lose that communication piece to resolve the dispute. By truly hearing the other party's concern and interest, you can better understand their position and work towards a mutual acceptable solution. Focus on interests, not position. In mediation, it's often helpful to move beyond rigid positions and instead of focusing on the underlying interests and needs of each party, by identifying common interests and exploring creative solutions that address those interests, parties can often find mutual beneficial solutions. So we focus on the interest part of what the party's position is and not the position itself. Then we can reconciliate with the dispute and kind of nurture that relationship, start nurturing it, start listening to the person, start giving them a little bit feedback of, I see where you're coming from, my apology, you know, and that's why reconciliation goes with apology too, and forgiveness. All of that is all one piece. It's a step to get to the process, like Mr. Barber said. You have to take that the steps in forgiveness. Everything it has a process that you have to go through to reach to the conciliation part. So stay positive and respectful. And when we say stay positive and respectful, we mean we don't want to go backwards in the dispute. So we want to stay positive, use choice of words, and be respectful of other people. So whatever they say, don't be disrespectful to them. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to reconciliate with the person. So while it can be difficult to remain positive and respectful in the face of conflict, doing so can help create a more productive atmosphere for mediation. By focusing on the goals of resolving the dispute rather than on their personal attacks or criticism, parties can create a more constructive and productive mediation process. So if we're not trying to interject negative feedback or keep telling them, well, you know, you did this and you're not so good at this, when you start doing that, then you're not going to solve it. And that person is you're going to escalate the situation. Because some people have quick tempers. And the minute you say something negatively, they could go from 0 to 60 real quick. And then it's hard to bring that temperature down. But as a mediator, again, we have to read the room. When we see somebody tapping their fingers or tapping their toes or nodding their head or rolling their eyes, we know that the other person, what the other person is saying, is taking that temperament up a notch. And we have to go to that person, or sometimes we have to interject and say, hey, are you finished? Or I think we should try to use certain choice of words. Or sometimes if we in a collective room, sometimes we say, you know what, I think it's time for us to move into a separate room, because you could see that the other person is getting annoyed, and it's best to just take them out of that situation so you could resolve that dispute at the same time too. So other part is be willing to compromise. That is so important in mediation. I call that that goes with being good, to come in mediation in good faith, the good faith process. You have to be willing to compromise. When you come in mediation, it's not about you. It's not about them. It's about the process. You have to give something to get something. And that's life itself. So you got to be willing to go into mediation with knowing that you're going to have to give up something, especially if it's a negotiation over some type of finance. You can't go in there and say, well, it's $10,000 he owed me. And then he has another dispute with you. Let's say it was a construction dispute. He paid $10,000 for materials. In his mind, you did crappy work. But you know, in your mind, you did the best work. You and your team was awesome. You provided the best job. You was on time on the job site every single day. But he feels he wasn't worth the $10,000 for the project. You have to go in there and say, you know what? I did the best I can, but I'm here in good faith in mediation to resolve this dispute. So I'm willing to knock $1,000 off of it, and I'm going to take $9,000 because I want your business. We have this dispute, but I'm here to resolve it. I'm here in good faith. So you have to be willing to compromise. So reconciliation and mediation often involves compromise. It is important to be open to the possibility of compromise and to explore creative solutions that may meet the needs of both parties. So you got to hear what the other party is saying in order to compromise. And again, that's when you're listening, because you in your mind, you're like, you know, I'm gonna go in this mediation and I'm just going to discount him. You know what? The compromise does not mean money. The compromise might be, you know what? He just want an apology. He felt like maybe it could have been, he could have had an argument with one of your subordinates, and one of your subordinates rubbed him the wrong way. And he felt that you as the owner, you should have handled that in a more professional manner and discipline your subordinate. So maybe the compromise was not money. Maybe the compromise was just for you to say, I'm sorry. I apologize. My employee was wrong. I did not know that happened, but now that you brought it to my attention, I'm sorry. And he would say, you know what? You're right. My temper that day, you know, I was outside. I had a bad day at work. I came home, and, you know, he did rub me the wrong way, but you know what? I was at fault also. So the compromise is the apology. Keep an open mind. That's another part of a helpful tip, is to keep an open mind in mediation, keep an open mind in reconciliation. Mediation is a collaborative process, and both parties should be open to exploring new ideas and solutions. And when you say new ideas and solutions in mediation, you can't go in with a cookie cutter mindset. You have to go in there with a creative mindset, because you may come up with an idea that both parties can't come up with. And that's the reason why they come to mediation. They come to mediation because we are professionals at the field we're in. We're there to assist them in resolving their dispute. So sometimes we have to come up with strategies and creative ways to resolve their dispute that they possibly could never come up on their own. Because if they could have come up on their own, there would have already been, dispute would have been solved before mediation. So we as mediators, we have to be creative in what we're doing. And sometimes if you send out your mediation package to both parties, you could also send out, I've done it before on complex mediation cases that I'm not working on. I've sent out where I want to know what the dispute is and what the challenges they face and what they would like to gain from this mediation process. So before I go in the room, I already know a strategy on how I could solve it, but I give them enough time to air their grievances out so I could assist them in resolving that dispute. So that's what's effective by keeping an open mind and willing to consider alternative perspectives and ideas. Parties can often find a solution that is more satisfactory than what either party had initially envisioned. So that's where our strategies and our skills come into play at all times in mediation. Communication clearly and honestly is one of the biggest things, is communication. And effective communication is key to achieving reconciliation in mediation. It is important to communicate clearly and honestly about your needs, interests, and concerns. We go into mediation we've seen, all of us here who have all professionals of mediation, we've seen it, even in arbitration, where one side is not clear on what they want, they're uncertain. And that could make mediation difficult for the mediator as well as frustrating for the other party, especially if, let's say, it's court-ordered mediation and you had 6 months to think of what you wanted for the mediation. Now you come in the mediation process and you're sitting there and you still don't know what you want. So it's like, why are you there? So having a clear and honest, effective communication is very helpful in mediation. And it's the same for the mediator too. As mediators, we have to have a clear, open, and be honest with the parties. Like if you say, hey, if you have experience in a particular field, especially if you're an attorney, and you're a mediator also, attorneys have a way of saying, listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. I've done like 100 of these cases. I don't think this is gonna work in your favor when you go to the judge. So you saying I would like to see the judge and you would like to go to trial, how about we take a step back and let's rethink this? I've done 100 cases in litigation like this. It's not gonna go down like you think. This is what's gonna happen. You can go in front of the judge, he's gonna say this, he's gonna say that, he's gonna that. Your whole story that you had doing in mediation, that's beautiful. In mediation, you get to air it out. When we go to court, the judge is not gonna listen to all that he say, she say. The judge wants facts. So being clear and communicative and being honest with the parties in mediation is very helpful. So as mediators, we gotta be firm, and we can't be timid. In mediation, we cannot, as mediators, we cannot be timid. We cannot sit back and be lazy. We have to work to resolve their dispute, because that's the only way. When they leave out of there, you want them to feel like this was well worth it. I feel good. And now they could, because even if they don't reconcile in mediation, they probably can reconcile when they go home. And on their drive home, they're thinking about everything that was said in mediation. It's gonna really hit them then. And then you know what? They'll probably call the other person back and say, hey, Mr. Lee, you know, in mediation today, I know I said a lot of things, but I've also heard a lot of things. And, you know, I would like to move forward. Let's just move past this. And I just want to give you apologies. You know, I'm sincerely apologize. And I did see your point of view. I know I didn't see it in the mediation process, but now that I have some time to think about it, I am sorry. Let's go back to that partnership that we had before. So it is important to communicate clearly and honestly about your needs, interests, and concerns. This helps to ensure that both parties are on the same page and can work together towards a common goal. And that common goal is reconciliation. That's the common goal. You want to save the partnership. You want to save the marriage. You want to save the boyfriend and girlfriend relationship. You want to save the mother and daughter relationship. You want to save the son and dad relationship. So that clearly communication is so helpful in resolving disputes. Reconciliation in mediation typically involves the following key elements. So I'm going to list out a couple of key elements to assist you in resolving your disputes, as well as reconciliation and mediation. So number one is acknowledging the emotional impact of the dispute. In order to move forward, both parties may need to acknowledge the feelings that have arisen as a result of the conflict. Number two, identifying common goals and interests. Parties need to explore what they have in common and what they would like to achieve in order to find a mutually acceptable resolution. And when they say that, sometimes it depends, and I see this in, I would use not construction, but labor and employment disputes that I work on. You have two employees working together, they got into some big argument. You know, this happens every day in job sites. And now one person felt offensive, they run to the HR department, HR comes in, steps in. HR sometimes has to play the mediator. and try to resolve this conflict between both parties. So when it comes to labor employment disputes, you definitely want to see, okay, my skill set and his skill set. He maybe have more years ahead of me in a certain particular skill set at work, but I have the newer version because I'm younger, I went to college, and there have been some update to this particular field. So you have to let them see eye to eye on that. You guys are in the same field. You guys are really not that much far apart from each other. You're working in the same field. How about you show him what you do and your years of experience? If both of you all show each other what you guys can do, you guys could actually learn from each other. So that's actually sharing them their common goal, their common interests. And that helps to resolve that dispute as we conciliate that dispute between both parties. Now they could go back working happy employees and go back to work and help the company make money. Generating and evaluating options. Parties may need to brainstorm and range of possible solutions and then evaluate each one to determine its potential to meet the parties' goals and interests. So evaluating their common goals and brainstorming their solutions. So what in mediation, we do that all the time. We always talk to them and say, what is your common interest? What do both of you guys want to get out of this mediation? Let's brainstorm. And I usually do that particular part when the party's in joint session, because I want, instead of going back and forth in both rooms, if both parties could hear what each other is saying in the joint process, then they could actually find ways to resolve the dispute themselves. And sometimes when you start to do that, you'll see the parties start to resolve it, and they'll start to actually not even notice that they're actually talking to each other without hostility. And then as mediators, we have to know one important thing in mediation, and I don't know if other mediators say this or not, or other speakers say it, but I'm gonna say it. We have to know when to sit back and let the mediation process take place with the parties. Sometimes parties start talking to each other and they can resolve their own dispute. They just needed somebody in the middle in case they get chaotic. So we got to know when to sit back and let the parties resolve their dispute. So that generating and evaluating options and brainstorming, that is key to resolving the dispute. Let them brainstorm on their own. And then when you feel like it's getting heated, then you step in and say, hey. But at the same time, you are using your listening skills at the same time, because you're listening to both parties and you are coming up options and you're making notes. I always write notes down. That way, if I put them into separate rooms, I could go back and say, well, Mr. Thomas did say that he's willing to do this here. How about you give him this? And then you give him this. But I could tell him that even though I came up with the idea, I'll let Mr. Thomas, I'll go to Mr. Thomas and say, hey, Mr. Thomas, Kevin came up with this idea. How you think about it? And they're like, oh, really? He did that? Yes, Mr. Thomas, he really did that. So now Mr. Thomas is feeling like Mr. Kevin, even though Mr. Kevin is there when they're in the room screaming, oh, he's not getting nothing. No, I'm not giving nothing. But when you go over to Mr. Thomas and you tell Mr. Thomas, you know, Mr. Kevin did actually, he came up with this idea. And I think it's a wonderful idea. You tell me how you think about it. Once you explain to him what you think of it, and he likes it too, now you can go and resolve the dispute. And again, moving from resolving the dispute, now you can move into do the reconciliation process and showing them ways that they both can actually resolve it. Negotiating a settlement. This is the part that a lot of mediators struggle with. A lot is negotiating the settlement, because when you're negotiating the settlement, it's like a give and take, and sometimes people are just dug in their ways and they don't want to give up something. So we have to definitely go private with them and put them in a separate room where we could have a strong conversation with them and say, listen, are you here in good faith or not? Do you want to resolve this dispute? Because I see you're dug in and you don't want to give something up. but we have to give something up in order to resolve this dispute. So negotiating the settlement is very hard sometimes, but again, that's where our creative communication skills and brainstorming comes into play. Once the parties have identified an option that appears to meet their needs, they can work together to negotiate the specific terms of the settlement. And the specific terms of the settlement, I know Mr. Victor knows this all too well. When you drafting up those terms and agreements, people get so heated when the other person has a specific term and they will not budge unless that term is within that contract. They do not want to settle unless that specific term is in there. And that term could be, let's use a landlord and tenant dispute. That term could be, I would like this person out in 2 weeks, but that person's like, well, I can't be out in 2 weeks. I have nowhere to go. I have nobody yet. It's hard to find a place in 2 weeks. And you have to go back to that person and say, well, you know, he is right. If you're looking at the market right now, it's hard to get a place to go in 2 weeks. Can we maybe try give him maybe 30 days to move out? And if that person is dug in, you have to do some finagling. You know, you have to go back on the other side and say, hey, he's not willing to give you 2 weeks. He's not willing to give you the 2 weeks, but I talked to him. He's going to go 1 more week. So you're going to have 3 weeks. Are you fine with 3 weeks? I could try to go. And if the other side says, well, 3 weeks is still tough for me. I say, that's what you say. Don't you have family, friends? You have, you know, your mom, your dad, you have a friend you could stay with for a little bit. Do you have enough funds to go like maybe in a hotel or one of those other long-term hotels, extended stay hotels for the extra week? So if I negotiate 3 weeks for you, and then you have your paycheck coming, if he allows you to take half the rent and put that towards where you could have living space for the other week, that way you'll still be out for 3 weeks. Then everybody's happy. So once we do that, now we could go back to the other side and then we could say, okay, he's willing to agree to 3 weeks. And then sometimes what I do, even though the other side says, oh, no, I'm not giving him no more than 3 weeks, to say, you know what? He's showing good faith. You think for the sake of mediation, maybe you could just throw in an extra week and just make it a month? I mean, you know how hard it is out there to get a place to stay. And then, you know, sometimes they'll say, you know what? Okay. For the mediation, yeah, I'll do that. Then you go to that and say, you know what? He really likes the relationship that you all had, and it was you're not a bad tenant. You didn't damage his place. So he had a change of heart, and he actually said that you could stay for a month. So he's giving you a month. And that now that person is like so happy that the landlord gave them a whole month now when it was just only 2 weeks. So now that starts the reconciliation process of them saying, you know what, he's not a bad landlord after all. And I would like to stay at one of his other properties if that so be the case. So then, of course, with him saying that, there's an apology is going to go with it. So when you go with an apology to the landlord and say, you know what, I apologize for everything. I just fell on hard times. And the landlord would say, I understand your position, but at the end of the day, I have a business to run. But I'm willing to give you an extra month. And, you know, and that's where the reconciliation come in now. They're going to save that relationship and that landlord and tenant relationship. Because relationships come in many forms, whether it's a business partnership, whether it's a family relationship, whether it's just regular friendships, or regular is business partnerships. Relationships comes in all types of forms. Sometimes you form relationships with people who hate you the most. Sometimes that's your haters becomes your greatest fan sometimes. So as long as you know the steps of reconciliation and forgiveness and acceptance, you can save even the toughest relationships. Developing a plan for implementation. Parties need to work together to develop a plan on how to settle, on how the settlement will be implemented, including any necessary follow-up actions or monitoring. As mediators, dependent on the case, here in the United States, some EEOC cases or some ADR case, not ADR, but ADA, that's American Disability Act for people that's in wheelchairs that have a disability. That's what the ADA is for. And certain panels, you have to go with the case. The mediator, when you mediate that case that day, your mediation is not finished. Some panels require you, the mediator, to stay with the case for at least 2 to 3 weeks to make sure that it's fully settled. So every panel have their way of doing things. Every government facility has their way of doing things. Some EEOC cases, you have to continue to monitor the case. Like if that particular agency, they usually draft up the settlement, they have to send it off to the mediators also, so we could see what's inside there, because we're the ones who's in mediation and know what the parties agree to. So if any changes happen in mediation, we have to go back to them and say, hey, in mediation, this is what the person needed to have inside this term line. So we need to go ahead and put this terminology inside here in order for this to be effective. Otherwise, the other party is going to get upset that that was not inside of the settlement agreement that they agreed to in mediation. So we still have to tread with certain cases and panels. We still, as mediators, have to tread that confidentiality line, like what is confidential and what is not confidential. And sometimes we just have to go to the parties to be safe and say, you know what, I have to divulge some information to this agency in order to draft up the contract. Is both parties allowing me to release some of this information in order to draft the contract? And you let them know it's just, the information is just to drop the contract, not to tell our agency every single thing that was said in mediation. So we have to make sure that we are very effective on where we're doing that and working with certain agencies and certain panels. So maintaining ongoing communication. Once a settlement has reached, it is important for parties to maintain open line of communication in order to ensure that the settlement is being implemented successfully and to address any issues that may arise. So maintaining an ongoing communication, I'm going to use construction for this one. With construction, let's say between the general contractor and the subcontractor, maintaining an ongoing communication is key, because building a house or a building is complex in itself. And if they're still holding some type of animosity towards each other and they're not communicating, it's going to trickle down to the people out there, the workers in the field that's building a home. And negative energy in construction can lead to a lot of problems in mediation. So somebody got some stuff going on there, that screen we need to remove immediately. So maintaining that ongoing communication, again, in construction is very serious, is very important for us, for the general contractor, as well as the subcontractor, to make sure that that communication is great. Like especially if they're looking over plans, or there's a work order change, and the subcontractor, if their communication is not good, they cannot build that house good. They cannot deal with the other subcontractors on the field if both of them is having issues. Because in a construction project, you have the electrician, you have the plumber, you have the air conditioning company, you have the road people, you have the roofer, and all of them is reporting to one guy, which is the GC. So if the GC, the general contractor, if he has very poor communication skills, there's no way this project is going to go off without a hitch. So maintaining ongoing communications in disputes is key. Same as in family disputes, ongoing communication is key. Between the husband and the wife, you know, the marriage, they need to communicate very well in order for them to save that marriage. Same as in workplace disputes. If you're gonna have issues at work, you don't want to have people at work talking about you, creating a hostile, toxic environment in the workplace. So maintaining ongoing communication and asking somebody how you feel about things so far after this dispute have been solved by the mediator. Is everything fine with you? Because I want to make sure that everything is resolved with us, and I want to continue looking forward, because again, this is just something that happened. What I've done already, move forward, and I accept your apology, and I hope you accept my apology. So those are things that we want to keep track of in mediation, is that maintaining an ongoing communication. And it depends on the dispute that you're in. Partnership disputes, I've called up other partnerships and I say, hey, this is Joseph George, your mediator, and I'm just following up to see how that partnership went. After mediation, it's been 2 weeks now after mediation. How is things going with you and Mr. Kelly? Is Mr. Kelly and you guys living up good, or do we need to have another sit down briefly? Being that we don't got to the root of the problem, I think if we sit down again, it should only be like maybe one more, like an hour or so, sitting down with you guys and maybe trying to find out another solution to resolve this. And I explained to them, I'm just doing this follow-up call just to make sure that you guys don't get heated and don't feel like you can't come back into mediation and resolve it. So that's again, that's what I do with my clients. I always do a follow-up. And it depends on if it's a debt case, they have to stick to the stipulation that they signed. So you really don't need to follow up on that too much. But the construction, definitely the partnerships, the family mediation portions, you always want to do a follow-up and check on those just to see how it's going, see if maybe they may need your assistance again. Because sometimes they don't know it till you actually mention it. So you know what? I was thinking about that the other day. I'm glad you called, Mr. George. We sure could need your help again, because I feel something inside me, just something that I never talked about in mediation. And I would like to get it off my chest, but I would definitely like a third party to assist me with that. So maintaining that good communication is very good. And again, once a settlement has been reached, it is important for parties to maintain an open line of communication in order to ensure that the settlement is being implemented successfully and to address any issues that arise. So we always want to make sure we don't let things fall short on the parties, because they're paying us a lot of money too. I don't know about you guys, but I charge $350 an hour. So they're paying us a lot of money. So we want to at least give them a phone call and say, hey, I'm just doing a follow-up call. Because sometimes in mediation, we kind of like doctors. We are curing a symptom of a dispute that the parties could not resolve on their own. So we are doctors of disputes. So we look for the underlying cause, the root of it, and then we as mediators, we are the antidote for that dispute. So we help them solve that. So we got to be doing our follow-up phone calls and just checking on our parties. And again, keep in mind that every dispute requires a follow-up call, but you would know the ones that have. So with that being said, I've turned everything over to Mr. Naching. Any questions that anybody want to ask?
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph George, for this wonderful session. It was actually enlightening. So beyond reconciliation, you have helped us to see the various things and aspects that needs to be considered for a proper reconciliation. We are very, very happy, and we are glad to have you here. Sorry for what was just shown on the screen. You know, people who register have access to attend the meeting because we want people to benefit from it, you know. So sorry about that. We have just few questions. Please, if you have a question, you can raise your virtual hand. And I think I can start by saying I am interested in that $250 per hour.
No, it's not 250, it's 350.
Oh, 350.
Yes,
Wow.
per hour. And it's a minimum of 3 hours.
Wow. That's 350 US dollars per hour. I think there is
and it's a minimum of 3 hours. So they have to sign up for a minimum of 3 hours. You cannot resolve a dispute in 3 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay. So for ADR practitioners, you can look forward to an opportunity to be charging $350 per hour. You know, that's a well-developed country, the United States. We on our own part are trying to develop, and then by the time you go out there and you advocate for ADR and you make people get to know that they can use the system, especially for some of us who are in the developing countries, I think when the system begins to work, you have a lot of benefits to, to drive from it. So let's advocate, encourage people to come and get some enlightenment, talk to them about ADR, talk to them about using the ADR procedures or the system and resolving their disputes through the system. I think that will be very, very interesting. So, you made mention, Mr. Joseph, of okay, Mr. Victor mentioned mediator's proposal. So will you like to give a context to it? Because we learned that a mediator shouldn't interfere in the proceeding, so he's neutral. And unlike conciliation, where maybe the mediator makes such proposals and then subject to the parties overriding consent. So will you want to give a context to it? How does a mediator's proposal work? Is it in respect to the conciliation after the mediation session, or what is it?
So you mean, do as a mediator interject into the process when parties are trying to resolve a dispute? That's what you're asking, or are you asking
mediator's proposal?
The proposal as when you say
okay, maybe let Mr. Victor, because he made a comment in respect of that. So let Mr. Victor speak to it.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Joseph, for your very enlightening presentation. A mediator's proposal, in a nutshell, is a recommendation by the mediator to the party. And there are rules that govern that process. It should be a last resort, number one. And then number two, it has to, where there is an impasse, that's when you would be called to help out the parties. The idea here is just helping out the parties. And the thing again about mediator's proposal, it's not something you pull from mass on earth. It's based on your observation of the room. You know, what's the language of one of the parties and what's the language of the other party. So your role is just to bring them together. So in simple terms, a mediator's proposal is a recommendation by the mediator to the parties.
Yes. So
thank you.
And a lot of people get it confused sometimes. So I understand where you're coming from now. So we are there to assist. The word assist the parties in resolving the dispute. That key word is assist. So we as professionals, that's why you have to have knowledge on the dispute that you actually mediate. So you can assist the parties with options. You could turn to a party and you could say, listen, it seems like you're struggling to resolve this dispute on the other party. Do you want my assistance to help you? And then you turn to them and say, keep in mind, this is your mediation process, but I can assist you with options if you need me. So that's where that comes in. So it's not that you're interjecting into their mediation, but you're assisting them with options to resolve the dispute. Our goal right there is to help the parties resolve the dispute. Ultimately, the parties hold the power to resolve their own dispute, but we assist them in reaching that mile. Especially, let's use a insurance dispute. Guy's car got hit from another guy. The other guy's insurance saying that the guy car could go to the mechanic shop and be fixed. His expert on his side is saying, no, the car needs to be written off. He wants $50,000 for the car. The insurance company say, we're not paying that, we'll give you $10,000. So 50,000 and 10,000, you're miles apart. Do we call it an impasse, or do we try to help assist them in negotiating options? When they come into mediation, half the time especially if you have a proceed, if you have a proceed versus attorney, that proceed doesn't really know the language or what to do. So that proceed is gonna enlist our assistance to access. Should I try for 20? Should I try for 10? Should I just take the 10,000? So we could say, if it was me, I would have tried to do this. So we could give them options and let them go with it, let it be their zone. So that's why we are there to assist them. We're not going there and say, no, just tell them this, because we're not attorneys. We're not there to delegate on their behalf. We could say, if it was me now, I personally would have asked for this much. And then you go to the other side, because remember in mediation, sometimes you're playing both sides. You're like a double agent. Sometimes you're playing both sides. You go to the other side and say, what's your magic number to settle on this dispute? What is really your magic number? And once they tell you their magic number, you go to the side and you ask the other side, what's your magic number? And then you say, now you try to bring both of them where it's kind of like we say, split the apple in half. You want to get them with a splitting the apple in half where both is a win-win for both parties. He feels he got something out of it. The insurance feel like they didn't lose a whole lot of money out of the whole deal, but they both leave there knowing that I got something out of the deal. So again, we are there to assist them to resolve their dispute. And that word assist can mean anything. Again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that clarity. We'll get to maybe another session where we can talk about mediator's proposal, maybe in detail, so that as a mediator, you will be equipped with the relevant skills you need to assist the parties in resolving their disputes. We've talked about during the settlement how to navigate through impasse, and then it was actually an interesting session. So another question here. Pardon?
Sorry, Mr. Nanchang, can I just say maybe one thing?
Okay.
In any given mediation, remember mediation is assisted negotiation or facilitated negotiation. We have got 3 negotiators. You, the mediator, you are a negotiator yourself. And then of course we have the parties. And that makes 3 negotiators in the room. So technically, when you are presenting a mediator's proposal, you are wearing your hat of a negotiator because you are negotiating with both parties.
Yep.
In one of the rooms, you'll present it to them this way. If Mr. Nanchang agrees to 50,000, are you willing to come down to 45,000? And then I'll go to the next room where I have Senior Counsel Stephen Lungu, and I'll tell him this. I've just spoken to Mr. Nanchang, and he is willing to come down to 40. He's willing to come up to 45,000 if you stick at 50,000. Technically, what I'm doing is that I am negotiating with both parties. So you realize that when you're having a mediation where you have an impasse, you have negotiations at different levels. You have negotiation between the parties, and at some point in time, you have negotiations between the mediator and the parties.
Yes.
So that's where the mediator's proposal comes into context. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Victor.
That happens a lot in car insurance cases. It happens a lot. It's like every single day you have to negotiate back and forth with the insurance companies and the other party. And sometimes with both attorneys, if both have counsel, then you negotiate with both attorneys. So, and then sometimes we have to go in what we call hybrid mediation. If things seem to be deadlocked and their trial case is so close, but you know you're so close to resolving this dispute, you could turn to both parties and you could say, hey, let's stop. Can we do hybrid mediation? Would both parties allow me to mediate, to negotiate on both parts? I'm going to use my mediation and my negotiation hat. And once both parties agree on it, now you could go full-fledged negotiating on both parties' hats without without interrupting the integrity of mediation. So that's
Thank you
what
very much. Yes, thank you.
That's why a lot of places is starting to use a lot of hybrid mediation because they find that it's very effective, because mediation has you deadlocked, but negotiation is a whole nother. Negotiation is kind of like the black child of the dispute resolution, because there's some tricks and stuff you could do, and it's not governed a whole lot under the mediation and arbitration rules. So the negotiation is not fully regulated yet, but it's a powerful tool to use.
Thank you very much, Mr. George. I think one of the settlement that we're going to be doing in, I think, next month will be on hybrid processes. That's the relevance of hybrid processes in mediation, because we discover that it's becoming more prominent and becoming very, very useful in today's dispute resolution. So we are going to be considering that. Now, the question, another question by one of the participants is whether or not in a situation where a mediator is unable to ensure reconciliation between the parties in a dispute, can it be said that the mediation is inconclusive, or that the mediator has underperformed, where he is not able to ensure reconciliation? Has he failed? Has he underperformed? Or has he actually discharged his responsibility?
Okay, so it says, in a situation where a mediator is unable to ensure reconciliation between parties in dispute, is it conclusive that such mediator has underperformed? No, no. The mediator cannot solve every problem on earth. If we could have done that, we would have had the Palestine and Israel done. We would have had, Russia and Ukraine done. We had the United States and China done. No, the parties have to resolve their own dispute. The parties have to come in mediation in, again, wanting to compromise and give something up. If nobody's coming in with a compromise or is there in good faith, there's no reconciliation. Some people just are mean people, and they're gonna be like that. So as long as the mediator did his work and he got them in the room and he got them and they leave the room with all their limbs on their body, I think the mediator did his job, and nobody has a black eye.
Okay, Mr. Victor, will you want to say something on that as we round up?
That he is accurately right. Maybe just to add one more thing. At times, there are outside factors beyond the room that will get to affect how cases go about. I'm going to illustrate this by using an example. I once had the opportunity of mediating a conflict between a brother and sister, and the sister was married, and we spent a whole day trying to work out a solution, and it never worked out. But guess what? When they all went back to their homes, the wife was now telling me, this is a couple of weeks later down the line, she called me and she told me this, that guess what? On that day after the mediation, I went back to my house, and just before I rested in my private chambers, my husband whispered these words to me. I mean, what would happen if you reconciled with your brother? For crying out loud. This is your flesh and blood. You all came from one womb. And that was the magic there. So all I'm trying to say is this. At times, you might not get the job done when you are in the room, but there are outside factors that will catalyze and culminate into reconciliation. So it's right that, as mediators, we don't have all the answers. I think that would be a tragedy if you told the parties that you have all the answers in the world. That in and of itself is a tragedy. So we do as much as we can, and like we put it, we lead the process, and they own the outcomes.
Thank you very much. I don't know if the chairman of the governing body of Settlement House Area Training Institute, Ms. Ankama Roskana, is still with us. If she can give a thought to it, because I know we've been talking and then she keeps emphasizing the fact that, whether the parties settle or not, there is no way the parties will come to the mediation table and go back the same way. I don't know if you can add something to that as we round up. Maybe she can as well, in the absence of any further question, give us a vote of thanks and then we are done.
Okay, I'm very much around. Thank you very much, George. Thank you very much, Mr. Baba. I sincerely appreciate your time and this robust discussion. Yes, it is. I keep saying it, and I think I will still say it is just the icing on the cake of what they have said. Woe betide a mediator who claims to know everything. It is not possible. And for you to have succeeded in bringing two parties to the mediation table, that is a plus. You have done a good job, because before then, possibly they could not sit in the same room, the same table, and face each other. And while Mr. George was talking, he kept saying that the parties are talking to each other unknowingly, and they are picking some things that they didn't know before about each other, or they didn't understand the other person's perspective. But by giving them opportunity to talk, they will pick one or two things, even if they don't reconcile, just like Baba has just said. When they go back, the steering role for settlement is already on. They will work on it. But the truth about it is, there is the possibility that they will do an inner reflection when they go back, and hostility has actually reduced. So the fact that hostility has reduced, it is a step forward. I think the mediator has done a good job by mere bringing them to the table. So with all of this, let's keep, like I keep saying, let's keep learning the skills. Let's not be tired of learning new skills, because no one knows it all. We keep learning every day. And we're so grateful for SHATI for organizing Settlement Hour on monthly basis. I think if you have been following from impasse up to negotiation, out to reconciliation, forgiveness, acceptance, you will know that you have increased your knowledge about mediation and the interjection of negotiation while you're mediating. And then we also know that there's a difference between mediation and conciliation. So I want to say thank you very much for inviting these wonderful speakers to add more knowledge to us. I sincerely appreciate you, and I wish all of us a very wonderful evening. So sorry, I think we still have to keep working on our time. I still emphasize that we should try and keep the time, because some people have marked engagements. Thank you very much, George. Maybe you invite us to Florida one of these days.
Yes.
And thank you, Mr. Baba. We appreciate if you invite us over too. And then from there, we go to Washington and see how they charge 350 per hour, then we come back and implement it in our developing work. Thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate all of you for your time. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you all for taking out time out of your busy schedules to be with us. I believe that what you have done here will go a long way to add value to the ADR world. The recording of this will be sent to you. You can share it with family and friends and ADR practitioners who may want to add to their knowledge of what they have done. Without any further comment, I cannot see anybody raising his hands. In the absence of everything, in the absence of any other thing, I would like to say that we are looking forward to seeing you again in next month in some edition of the Settlement Hour. And then I believe that you come with one or two more persons, and then we'll make the conversation rich. And you can study ahead of time. We'll send out the flyer so that we can have a rich conversation. Like my brother Victor will say, cross-pollinate. Yeah, so thank you very much. Let's call it a day. See you. Maybe if you can on your camera, we can take a snapshot, please, shortly, and then we are done. Can you put on your, is it video? Let's take a snapshot.
Well, it's that mine is bought by the host, so I can't see on my video, unfortunately.
Okay.
I took one for you, so.
Okay. So
my video is not. I don't know why it is happening.
Camera? Your camera, right? Let's take a snapshot briefly. Okay.
I think you need to enable them to put on their cameras.
Okay. Oh, I see. Because of that incident, and I had to disable. Confirm if you can. Okay, good.
Wow.
I had to.
People are looking lovely here. Why were you hiding this smile?
Hello. Yes, right.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, this is nice.
Oh, beautiful.
Today I see a lot of problem due to net.
Sorry about it.
This is nice. Okay.
Wow.
Good one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's nice having you. Okay, wow, I can see the beautiful faces coming up. Yes, thank you very much. It's good having you around. That's a good one. Thank you, Ms. Aro, for joining us. We are happy to have you around. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oluwa Fisayomi.
Thank you, beautiful people.
Yes, thank you. Have a nice day ahead of you.
Likewise, thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Take care. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Yes.